My wife manipulated me into having a child, then kidnapped him to save him from men like me. I got him back and slammed the door on her forever. Years later, she's begging for his forgiveness. When my wife and I first met, she was perfect. As I drove her home from our first date in my car, I played my favorite song. She told me she didn't like it, and I told her that it was cool because of the melody. After 20 seconds of listening, she nodded and changed her mind. That's when I realized just how feminine and receptive she would be to my opinion, and I wanted to protect her at all costs. But nothing could save her from the wrath of radical feminism. You see, I used to love feminists, until my wife met this group near her job. These women were wolves in sheep's clothing. At first glance, it was just a friend group that supported each other and had a strong sense of sisterhood. But after spending a meal with them, I wanted to unalive myself, because they were the type of people that made it their life's purpose to get upset at everything. When I held the door open for them, one of them stomped on my toe with their heel and said, "That's for thinking women can't do anything by themselves." Or when I paid for the meal, the one sitting beside me pinched my arm and said, "Women work too." But when I asked if anyone else wanted to chip into paying the bill by zelling me, the entire table went silent. Go figure. It was after this meal that the pieces started coming together, because up to this point, our arguments were making no effing sense. If she ever caught me with a single dirty sock on the floor, she would tell me that it's my fault that RP allegations aren't taken more seriously, because no one respects women. Or if I ever asked to cue a song when she was on aux in the car, she'd say it was just like me, as a man, to be so effing entitled and make everything about myself. It honestly got to the point where I asked her to take a pregnancy test, because her hormones were going everywhere, and when it came out as negative, I knew it was just her crappy friends that were causing our marriage to collapse. But if you know me, then you know I am the last effing person to ever let a marriage die. Not just for me, or for her, but also for my son, Ian. Because he had already become attached to her, and saw her as a mother. So I did everything. I tried manipulation. Nothing crazy, just invited her to meet my friends who respected both men and women to show her what it was like. Didn't work. Next, I tried lavishing her with everything I could think of. For weeks, I took her on expensive boat dates, hotel room visits, even decorated our bedroom with that huge Valentine's Day display multiple times, just because. But it was never enough. She never thanked me, never changed her behavior, always just informed me that I was doing the bare minimum, and it was simply what she deserved. So in a final resort, I tried to act like her. I played her exact playlists, which had all turned into songs with extreme profanities, treated men the same as her, and at one point even got my nails done with clear gel. But just when I thought we were actually getting somewhere, I came home to Ian crying his eyes out. The only other person with him was my wife, but she was downstairs while he was in his room. It didn't make any sense. As he cried, I held him and did the breathing exercises we always did together whenever he got overstimulated. When he finally calmed down, he took off all his clothes. What I saw next made me almost vomit. All over his tiny arms, legs, and chest were injuries, one that could have only been done by an adult. I didn't say anything, just reclothed him and drove him to my sister's place for the night. When I got back, I screamed at my wife for the first time ever. "Was that you?" She looked at me and rolled her eyes. "Oh, here we go. Man screams at woman because of his fragile ego. Did you lay a single hand on Ian?" She looked shocked that I had spoken back. "You should be thanking me. I'm making sure he doesn't turn out to be a shitty man like the rest of this population." I stopped listening after that. If she wasn't a woman, I would have wailed on her until red splattered against the walls. Instead, I took a deep breath. "We're effing done," I said, before walking out and driving to my sister's place. I figured that after the divorce process ended, I'd never have to deal with her again. But I was wrong, because a few weeks later, her and her feminist circle broke into my sister's home while I was at work. I called the police as soon as the home security detected movement, but they were too late. Ian was gone. My hands shook as I gripped the steering wheel, racing back to my sister's house. The police were already there, their cruisers parked haphazardly in the driveway. An officer approached me as I stumbled out of my car. I explained everything as calmly as I could manage. How my ex-wife had hurt Ian, how I'd taken him to my sister's for safety, how the security cameras had caught movement before they disappeared. The officer took notes, his face growing more serious with each detail. Inside, my sister was a wreck. She kept apologizing, saying she'd only stepped out for groceries. The back door had been jimmied open, the lock completely destroyed. Ian's few belongings were scattered across the guest room floor. The detective assigned to the case asked me detailed questions about my ex-wife's recent behavior. I told him about her feminist friends, about the escalating hostility, about finding Ian covered in injuries. He nodded, writing everything down. They put out an Amber Alert immediately. Ian's school photo flashed across every phone in the state. 5 years old, brown hair, hazel eyes, last seen wearing his favorite dinosaur shirt. My chest tightened, seeing his smiling face on the screen. I spent the next hours at the police station, providing every detail I could think of. Names of her friends, places they frequented, her work address, family members she might contact. The detective assured me they were doing everything possible. When I finally left the station, exhaustion hit me like a truck, but I couldn't rest. I drove to my ex-wife's workplace, hoping someone might know something. The receptionist recognized me, and her face immediately hardened. She told me my ex-wife had taken sudden leave 2 days ago. No explanation, just said she had personal matters to attend to. When I asked about her friends, the receptionist's expression grew even colder. She said those women often came by during lunch breaks. I tried calling my ex-wife's phone, straight to voicemail. Her parents hadn't heard from her in weeks. Her sister hung up on me the moment she heard my voice. Every lead felt like a dead end. Back at my sister's house, I sat in Ian's temporary room, staring at his scattered toys. The breathing exercises we'd practiced together echoed in my mind. He'd need those now more than ever. My phone buzzed. The detective. They'd tracked her car to an ATM withdrawal 3 towns over, but the trail went cold after that. Security footage showed her alone, wearing sunglasses and a baseball cap. No sign of Ian or her friends. I couldn't just sit and wait. I opened social media, searching through her friends' profiles. Most were locked down tight, but one had recently posted photos from what looked like a cabin retreat. Mountains in the background, a distinctive red barn visible in one shot. I screenshot everything and sent it to the detective. He said they'd look into it, but warned me not to take matters into my own hands. The last thing Ian needed was for me to get arrested trying to find him. Sleep was impossible that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Ian's injuries, heard him crying alone in that room while she sat downstairs, probably texting her toxic friends about teaching him not to grow up entitled. The next morning brought frustration. The detective called to say they'd identified the cabin from the photos, but it was empty when they arrived. Fresh tire tracks suggested someone had left recently. They were checking traffic cameras in the area. I decided to visit some places my ex-wife used to frequent. The organic grocery store where she'd first met those women, the yoga studio they attended together, the coffee shop where they held their weekend meetups. At the coffee shop, I recognized one of the baristas. She remembered me from when I'd picked up my ex-wife once. When I explained the situation, her eyes widened. She said the group had been in yesterday morning, huddled in the corner booth, speaking in hushed tones. She couldn't hear what they discussed, but remembered them mentioning something about protecting the future and necessary sacrifices. One of them had paid with a credit card. She gave me the name, Catherine Williams. I passed this information to the detective immediately. He seemed grateful for the lead, said they'd run the name through their systems. Within an hour, he called back. Catherine had rented a property about 2 hours north, paid for a full month in advance. The police were mobilizing to check it out. The detective firmly told me to stay put, that they'd handle it, but sitting still felt impossible. Ian had been gone for over 24 hours now. Every minute mattered. I found myself driving aimlessly, trying to think like my ex-wife. Where would she feel safe? Where would those women take a kidnapped child? They genuinely believed they were saving him from becoming another toxic man. They'd need somewhere isolated. My phone rang. Unknown number. I answered immediately, hoping against hope. But it was Victoria Chen, someone I didn't recognize at first. Then she explained she used to be part of my ex-wife's friend group, but had quietly distanced herself months ago. She'd heard about Ian through the Amber Alert, said she'd been struggling with whether to call, but couldn't stand by knowing a child was in danger. The group had become increasingly extreme, she explained. What started as empowerment had twisted into something darker. She mentioned they'd talked about a member's family farmhouse, somewhere remote where they could reprogram young boys before society corrupted them. She didn't know the exact location, but remembered it was near a small town called Millbrook. I thanked her profusely and immediately called the detective with this new information. He said they were already investigating the rental property, but would add this to their search parameters. The net was closing. That evening, I sat with my sister, both of us staring at our phones, waiting for news. She blamed herself, kept saying she should have been more careful. I assured her this wasn't her fault. The only people to blame were my ex-wife and her deranged friends. The detective called around 9 p.m. They'd found evidence at the rental property suggesting the group had been there recently. Children's clothing, food wrappers, toys, but they'd cleared out, likely warned somehow. He promised they were expanding the search. I couldn't take the helplessness anymore. I told my sister I needed air and drove toward Millbrook. I wasn't planning to interfere with the investigation, just needed to be closer to where Ian might be. The 2-hour drive gave me too much time to think. What were they telling him? Were they punishing him for crying? For asking for me? The breathing exercises we'd practiced were supposed to help him calm down, not survive a kidnapping. My hands gripped the wheel tighter. Millbrook was tiny, the kind of place with one main street and a handful of farms scattered around the outskirts. I stopped at the gas station, showed the attendant photos of my ex-wife and Ian. He hadn't seen them, but suggested I check with the diner owner. The diner was closed, but I spotted an older woman locking up. When I explained my situation, showing her the Amber Alert on my phone, her expression softened. She said a group of women had come in that morning, ordering food to go. One had a young boy with her. My heart raced. I asked for details. She remembered the boy seemed quiet, subdued. The women paid cash, didn't stay long. One mentioned they were staying at the old Hendricks place, but she didn't know where that was. Suggested I ask at the police station. I called the detective immediately with this information. He thanked me, but firmly instructed me to return home. They would handle it from here. I agreed, but instead found myself driving the back roads around Millbrook, looking for old farmhouses. Then I saw it, a glimpse of red barn through the trees, just like in the social media photo. My pulse quickened. I pulled over, trying to think rationally. The smart move was to call the police, give them the location, let them handle it. But as I reached for my phone, I saw movement near the barn. A small figure in a dinosaur shirt, being led by a woman toward the main house. Ian, my son, was right there, maybe 300 yards away. I called the detective, gave him the exact location, GPS coordinates and everything. He said units were 20 minutes out, told me to stay in my car, to not approach under any circumstances. I agreed, even as every instinct screamed at me to run to my son. 15 minutes passed like hours. I watched the farmhouse, saw lights moving inside, counted 4 cars parked outside. They were all there, the whole toxic group. Just as I was about to lose my mind waiting, I heard sirens in the distance. The response was swift and professional. Police cars surrounded the property. Officers approached with a warrant. I stayed by my car as instructed, watching everything unfold. Then I heard shouting, saw figures scattering from the back of the house. One officer emerged from the front door. Even from a distance, I could see he was carrying something. Someone. A small figure in a dinosaur shirt. I ran forward, unable to stop myself. The officer saw me coming, recognized me from the station. Ian was in my arms before I even realized I'd covered the distance. He clung to me, silent at first, then breaking into sobs. I held him tight, doing our breathing exercises together, just like we'd practiced. The detective appeared, said they'd arrested all 5 women, including my ex-wife. They'd found evidence of their plans, notebooks full of their twisted ideology about saving young boys from masculine toxicity. The prosecutor would have plenty to work with. I drove Ian to the hospital first. He needed to be examined, both for the old injuries and any new ones. As we sat in the emergency room, he wouldn't let go of my hand. The nurses were gentle, speaking in soft voices as they checked him over. When they asked him questions, he just buried his face in my shoulder. The doctor confirmed what I already knew. The injuries were consistent with physical abuse. She documented everything carefully, took photographs for evidence. Ian whimpered during the examination, and I had to step out twice to keep from losing it completely. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Friends, family, co-workers who'd seen the Amber Alert resolution on the news. I ignored them all. The only thing that mattered was Ian. The detective met us at the hospital. He explained that my ex-wife was being held without bail, given the kidnapping charges and evidence of abuse. Her friends were facing various charges too. But then he dropped the bomb. My ex-wife was already working with a lawyer, claiming I'd been the abusive one. She was spinning a story about how she'd rescued Ian from me, how the injuries were from my hands, not hers, how she'd taken him to protect him. The detective assured me the evidence was on my side, but I could see the concern in his eyes. That night, Ian slept in my bed. Every time I tried to move, even just to use the bathroom, he'd wake up crying. The social worker who visited the next morning said it was normal trauma response. She gave me pamphlets about child therapy, support groups, recovery timelines. My sister came over to help. She cooked meals I couldn't eat, cleaned things that didn't need cleaning. We both needed to stay busy. Ian wouldn't leave my side, following me from room to room like a shadow. Then the first blow came, a knock at the door, a process server with papers. My ex-wife was filing for emergency custody, claiming I was the danger. Her lawyer had crafted a narrative where she was the protective mother who'd tried to save Ian from an abusive father. I called my lawyer immediately. He said not to panic, that the evidence was clear. But when I hung up, my hands were shaking. She was really going to try to flip this whole thing around. The next few days blurred together. Lawyer meetings, therapy appointments for Ian, police interviews. Ian had started talking a little, but only to me. He told me things that made my blood boil. How they'd made him sit in a corner if he asked for me. How they'd told him I didn't want want him anymore, how they'd tried to teach him that all men were bad, even him. My ex-wife's lawyer was good, too good. He started filing motions, requesting delays, demanding access to evidence. He painted her as a concerned mother who'd made a desperate decision to protect a child. The feminist group became concerned friends who'd helped her escape an abusive situation. Then came the restraining order. She claimed I'd threatened her during our last argument before the separation, said she feared for her safety. The judge granted a temporary order, which meant I couldn't go near her, couldn't contact her, couldn't even respond to her lies directly. My lawyer said it was a common tactic, make me look aggressive, unstable, build a case that I was the real danger to Ian. The fact that I'd driven to Millbrook against police orders didn't help. They were painting it as reckless behavior, proof I couldn't be trusted. Ian's therapist became our lifeline. She was documenting everything, building a clear picture of what he'd endured. But therapy was slow. Ian would draw pictures instead of talking. Dark scribbles, figures with angry faces, a small boy separated from a larger figure by black lines. The custody hearing was set for 3 weeks out. My lawyer warned me it would be brutal. Her side would attack my character, my parenting, everything. They'd try to explain away Ian's injuries, maybe even suggest I'd caused them after taking him from the farmhouse. I started documenting everything obsessively, every nightmare Ian had, every time he flinched at sudden movements, every therapy session. My phone became a constant recording device, capturing his moments of progress and setbacks. My ex-wife's narrative was gaining traction in certain circles. Some of her feminist friends who hadn't been arrested started a social media campaign. They posted old photos of her and Ian looking happy, wrote long posts about domestic violence, shared statistics about fathers who got custody over protective mothers. I couldn't respond. My lawyer had forbidden any social media activity, so I watched helplessly as they built their false narrative, comment by comment, share by share. Some people who knew us started questioning what really happened. Even some of my coworkers grew distant. They'd heard the stories, seen the posts. When I returned to work part-time, conversations stopped when I entered rooms. My boss suggested maybe I should take more time off, focus on the legal situation. Ian started having severe separation anxiety. The daycare wouldn't take him back. He'd panic if I tried to leave. My sister watched him while I worked, but he'd call me crying, begging me to come back. The therapist said it was normal, but it was unaliving me. Then Victoria Chen called again. She'd been watching the social media campaign with growing disgust. She offered to help, to testify about what the group had really been planning. She had text messages, recorded conversations from when she was still in the inner circle. We met at a park while Ian played on the swings, never letting me out of his sight. Victoria showed me everything. Messages about deprogramming young boys, discussions about taking children from toxic masculine influences, plans they'd made months before Ian was taken. The messages were damning. They showed clear premeditation, discussed strategies for making fathers look abusive, shared articles about custody battles where mothers had successfully painted fathers as dangers. My ex-wife was active in all of them. My lawyer was ecstatic when I shared the evidence, but he warned me Victoria might face backlash for coming forward. Sure enough, within days, the social media campaign turned on her. They called her a traitor, claimed she was lying for attention, suggested I'd paid her off. Victoria stood firm. She'd left the group because she'd seen what they were becoming. What started as support for women's rights had morphed into something toxic, destructive. She couldn't stand by while they destroyed families. The restraining order hearing came first. My ex-wife showed up looking fragile, victimized. She'd lost weight, styled herself to look vulnerable. Her lawyer painted me as controlling, aggressive, the type of man who couldn't handle a strong woman standing up to him. But then my lawyer presented the security footage from my sister's house. Clear as day, my ex-wife and her friends breaking in. The judge's expression shifted. The temporary order was lifted, though my ex-wife's lawyer managed to get a mutual no-contact order instead. Small victory, but the custody battle loomed. Ian was making progress in therapy, starting to talk about what happened. The therapist was preparing a report for court, but warned me that these cases could go either way. Family court was unpredictable. My ex-wife's campaign intensified. She did interviews with sympathetic bloggers, appeared on podcasts about women's rights, always careful with her words, never quite lying, but twisting truth until it was unrecognizable. She was becoming a cause célèbre in certain circles. I focused on Ian. Every day was about his recovery, his healing. We developed new routines, new rituals, bedtime stories that went on for hours because he was afraid to sleep, meals together where he'd only eat if I ate first, proving the food was safe. The detective called with updates. They'd found more evidence at the farmhouse, plans for other children, other families they'd been watching. The prosecutor was building a strong criminal case, but that was separate from custody. Criminal conviction didn't automatically mean loss of parental rights. My lawyer hired a private investigator. We needed to show the judge who my ex-wife really was, not the victim she was pretending to be. The investigator found interesting things: financial records showing large transfers to her friends, meetings at hotels paid for with cash, a paper trail of deception. But she had investigators too. They dug into my past, interviewed ex-girlfriends, former coworkers, looking for any sign of aggression, control, toxic masculinity. They found a bar fight from college, spun it as evidence of violent tendencies. Ian's 6th birthday approached. He didn't want to party, just wanted to stay home with me. We made a cake together, his small hands helping mix the batter. When it came time for wishes, he whispered so quietly, I almost missed it. I wish the bad ladies never come back. The criminal trial was set to begin before the custody hearing. My lawyer said this was good. Criminal conviction would help our case. But my ex-wife's lawyer was fighting for separate trials, trying to delay, complicate, confuse. More witnesses came forward. Parents from Ian's school who'd noticed changes in him after my ex-wife's behavior shifted. Neighbors who'd heard her yelling at him for acting too much like a boy. Each testimony was a small victory, but the fight was exhausting. My ex-wife requested supervised visitation while the custody case was pending. Her lawyer argued she had a right to see her son, that denying access was parental alienation. The thought of Ian having to see her again made me sick. The therapist testified that forced visitation would be traumatic for Ian at this stage. The judge agreed to postpone the decision until after more therapy progress. Another small victory, but my ex-wife's lawyer spun it as me turning Ian against his mother. The social media war escalated. Hashtags appeared. Hashtag justice for mothers. Hashtag believe protective moms. My name was dragged through the mud by people who'd never met me. Ian's trauma became fodder for their agenda. I had to change Ian's daycare plans 3 times. Word would get out where we were enrolled, and protesters would show up. Not many, but enough to scare the administrators. They'd hold signs about fathers' rights being used to abuse mothers, about children being forced into dangerous situations. My sister received threats, vague ones, but enough to make her install new security systems. She never complained, but I could see the strain. My family was being punished for protecting Ian. Then came a breakthrough. One of the arrested women, Catherine Williams, decided to cooperate with prosecutors. She'd been horrified when when she realized they'd actually hurt Ian. She'd thought it was just about education, not abuse. Her testimony would be crucial. My ex-wife's lawyer tried to discredit O'Catherine, claiming she was lying to get a lighter sentence. But O'Catherine had kept records, videos of planning sessions, messages about their true intentions, evidence that contradicted every claim my ex-wife was making. The custody hearing was postponed twice. Each delay meant more time in limbo, more therapy sessions where Ian asked when the bad stuff would be over. I ran out of ways to explain legal procedures to a 6-year-old. We developed a new normal. Morning routines that included checking locks twice, afternoon activities that kept us in public, visible spaces, evening rituals that involved me proving over and over that I wasn't going anywhere. My ex-wife made a mistake. In an interview with a sympathetic podcaster, she let her mask slip, started ranting about how men were inherently violent, how boys needed to be reformed from birth. The interviewer, sensing controversy, pushed harder. The full interview was damaging to her cause. My lawyer had it transcribed, highlighted the worst parts. Her words about Ian needing to be fixed before he became like other men. Her admission that she'd been planning the intervention for months. Her belief that fathers had no real role in raising children. But her supporters rallied. They claimed the interview was edited unfairly, that she'd been trapped into saying things out of context. The narrative war continued, truth becoming increasingly irrelevant to those who'd chosen sides. Ian started kindergarten at a new school. I'd vetted it carefully, met with administrators, explained the situation. They were supportive, had security measures in place, but I still sat in the parking lot for the first hour each day, just in case. Progress was slow, but real. Ian started playing with other kids again. His drawings became less dark. He still needed our breathing exercises, but less frequently. The therapist said he was resilient, that children could heal with proper support. The criminal trial began. I had to testify, relive finding Ian's injuries, describe the terror of him being taken. My ex-wife sat at the defense table, playing victim even as evidence mounted against her. Her friends looked less confident as the reality of prison became real. During cross-examination, her lawyer tried to paint me as controlling, suggested I'd exaggerated Ian's injuries, but the medical records spoke for themselves. The photos of bruises, the documented patterns of abuse, the jury's faces told the story. Victoria Chen testified brilliantly. She laid out how the group had radicalized, how noble intentions had warped into something dangerous. She had receipts for everything, messages, recordings, plans. My ex-wife's lawyer couldn't shake her. The verdict came back guilty on all counts: kidnapping, child abuse, conspiracy. My ex-wife's shock looked genuine. She'd really believed her own narrative. Her friends got varying sentences based on involvement, justice, but it didn't erase what Ian had endured. The custody hearing was anticlimactic after the criminal conviction. My ex-wife's lawyer tried to argue the criminal case was separate from custody, that she still deserved parental rights, but the judge had seen enough. Full custody to me. Supervised visitation only after extensive therapy and parenting classes, if the therapist deemed it safe for Ian. My ex-wife's rage was visible even as her lawyer tried to calm her. She screamed about injustice, about systemic bias, about fathers' rights being weaponized. But it was over. Legal victory didn't mean emotional victory. Ian still had nightmares, still needed therapy, still asked why mommy had hurt him, but we were safe. The law recognized what I'd known all along. She was the danger, not me. The social media campaigns eventually died down as new causes emerged. Some people would always believe her version, but it didn't matter anymore. What mattered was Ian healing one day at a time. We moved to a new city 6 months later. Fresh start, new school, new therapist who specialized in trauma recovery. Ian was doing better, making friends, laughing more. The breathing exercises became less about crisis management and more about mindfulness. He asked about her sometimes. I told him age-appropriate truths, that mommy was sick in her thinking, that it wasn't his fault, that he was safe now and always would be. He'd nod, process, then return to being a kid. The recovery wasn't linear. Bad days still happened. Triggers we didn't expect. But more often, there were good days. Soccer practice where he scored his first goal. Sleepovers he actually wanted to attend. Report cards showing he was thriving academically. I dated eventually, carefully, always prioritizing Ian's comfort. He was cautious but open, his therapist helping him understand that not all women were like his mother, that healthy relationships existed, that he deserved love and safety. Looking back, the signs had been there. The way she'd changed her mind about that song on our first date, I'd seen it as flexibility, not instability. The gradual shift in her friend group, the escalating rhetoric, the way she'd started seeing oppression in every interaction. But I couldn't have predicted how far it would go, how a movement meant to empower would be twisted into something that hurt a child, how ideology could override maternal instinct, how she'd convince herself that hurting Ian was saving him. The legal battles taught me about resilience, about fighting for truth when lies are louder, about protecting what matters most even when the world seems against you, about the importance of documentation, witnesses, and never giving up. Ian taught me about healing, about how children can bounce back with proper support, about the power of consistent love and stability, about how breathing exercises meant for overstimulation could become tools for surviving trauma and emerging stronger. We still do those exercises together sometimes, but now they're just habit, not necessity. A reminder of where we've been and how far we've come, a symbol of survival and recovery. The scars remain, physical and emotional, but they're fading. Ian is growing into a confident, compassionate young man. He knows his story, but isn't defined by it. He's learned that strength isn't about gender, but about character. And me? I learned that protecting your child sometimes means fighting battles you never expected. That truth eventually prevails, even when lies are louder. That healing is possible, even from the deepest wounds. That love, real, consistent, protective love, is the most powerful force there is. The years that followed weren't easy, but they were ours. Ian started 7th grade at a school where nobody knew our history. He'd grown tall, almost reaching my shoulder, and his confidence had returned in ways that still surprised me. The breathing exercises we'd practiced during his trauma had become something he taught other kids who struggled with anxiety. I'd remarried by then. Sarah was a pediatric nurse who understood trauma, understood why Ian sometimes still needed to check that I was nearby. She'd met us at one of his therapy sessions, volunteering her time to help kids process difficult experiences. Ian had taken to her slowly, carefully, but genuinely. Then the letter came. Official prison stationery, my ex-wife's handwriting. My hands trembled as I opened it. She was getting out. Good behavior, completed programs, the whole rehabilitation narrative. 5 years had passed since the trial. She wanted to see Ian. I called my lawyer immediately. He reminded me that the custody agreement still stood. Supervised visitation only if the therapist approved and Ian consented. But Ian was 12 now, old enough to have opinions the court would consider. That night, I sat Ian Ian down and showed him the letter. He read it silently, his face unreadable. When he finished, he set it down and looked at me. He asked if she could force him to see her. I told him no, that he had a choice now. He thought about it for days. Sarah and I gave him space, let him process. His therapist offered extra sessions. Finally, he came to me with his decision. He wanted to see her once, just to ask her why. The meeting was arranged at a family counseling center. Neutral ground, professional supervision. I waited in the lobby while Ian went in. Sarah held my hand as we sat in those uncomfortable plastic chairs, watching the clock. An hour later, Ian emerged. His eyes were red, but his shoulders were straight. He told me she'd cried, apologized, tried to explain about the ideology that had consumed her, but when he'd asked her directly if she still believed those things about men, about him, she'd hesitated. That hesitation told him everything. He never asked to see her again. The court respected his decision. She sent letters occasionally, which we kept unopened in a box. Ian said maybe someday he'd read them, but not now. Not while he was still becoming who he wanted to be. Victoria Chen stayed in our lives. She'd become an advocate for cult awareness, specifically how extreme ideologies could infiltrate seemingly positive movements. She spoke at conferences about her experience, always emphasizing how gradual the radicalization had been. Ian called her Aunt Vicky. My sister never fully forgave herself for that day they took Ian. No amount of reassurance could shake her guilt, but she became the fiercest protector, installing security systems for other single parents, volunteering with organizations that helped families escape dangerous situations. High school brought new challenges. Ian discovered he had a talent for debate, ironically enough. His experiences had given him a unique perspective on extremism, on how noble causes could be twisted. His teachers praised his ability to see multiple sides of issues while maintaining his own moral center. He dated eventually. I watched nervously as he navigated relationships, worried about what patterns he might have internalized. But Sarah helped me see that he was doing it right, communicating openly, respecting boundaries, walking away from anyone who showed red flags. The day he got accepted to college, we celebrated quietly. He'd chosen a school 3 states away, far enough to build his own life, but close enough to come home when he needed. He was studying psychology, wanting to understand what had happened to his mother, to help other kids who'd been through similar experiences. Before he left, we sat in his room packing. He pulled out an old dinosaur shirt, the one he'd been wearing when they took him. Somehow it had survived all our moves. He held it for a moment, then tossed it in the donation pile. He said he didn't need reminders anymore. My ex-wife tried to contact him directly when he turned 18. Social media messages, emails to his school account. He showed them to me, not asking for advice, just keeping me informed. He'd blocked her each time, calmly and without drama. He told me he'd said everything he needed to say in that one meeting. Sarah and I had a daughter when Ian was in his sophomore year. He came home for her birth, held her with such gentleness, it made my chest tight. He whispered to her that she was safe, that she'd always be safe, that her brother would make sure of it. The nightmares had stopped years ago, but sometimes I still woke up thinking I heard him crying. Sarah would remind me to breathe. The technique that had helped Ian through panic attacks now helped me through the echoes of trauma. Ian graduated with honors. His thesis was on the radicalization of social movements and their impact on family structures. His advisor said it was one of the most insightful papers she'd read. He dedicated it to all the kids who survived someone else's ideology. He went on to graduate school, then into practice. Dr. Ian became known for his work with children caught in custody battles involving extremist parents. He testified as an expert witness sometimes, his own experience lending weight to his professional opinions. The day he got married, I walked him down the aisle. His bride was a fellow psychologist who understood his history without being defined by it. As I stood to give a toast, I caught sight of Victoria in the crowd, tears streaming down her face. She'd become family in every way that mattered. My ex-wife died when Ian was 32. Prison had aged her badly, and the ideology that had consumed her had left her isolated. Her feminist group had long since disbanded, most members either imprisoned or reformed. She'd never stopped believing she was right. Ian asked me to go with him to the funeral. There were only a handful of people there. He didn't speak, just stood quietly at the back. Afterward, he told me he'd needed to see it end, to know that chapter was truly closed. He named his son after me. Little Jamie learned breathing exercises as a game, not as survival. He grew up knowing his dad's story in age-appropriate pieces, understanding that sometimes people who should protect you don't, but that healing was always possible. I retired early to help with the grandkids. Sarah and I bought a house with a big backyard, the kind of safe space I'd always wanted for Ian. We hosted Sunday dinners where Ian's family, my sister's family, and Victoria's family all gathered. The table was loud and chaotic and perfect. Sometimes new clients would come to Ian with stories eerily similar to ours, parents using ideology to justify abuse, children caught between extremism and love. He'd help them with a combination of professional skill and personal understanding that few could match. The breathing exercises became a family tradition, not for trauma anymore, but for mindfulness, for gratitude. We'd do them together before big moments, graduations, weddings, births, breathing in peace, holding love, exhaling the past. Ian kept one photo from his childhood, not one with his mother, but one of just him and me, taken a week after the rescue. Both of us looked exhausted, damaged, but we were together. He framed it in his office, a reminder of where the healing began. The last time we talked about those days in detail was when his daughter turned 5, the age he'd been when it happened. He asked me how I'd found the strength to fight so hard. I told him it wasn't strength, it was love, simple, protective, unwavering love. He understood then what I'd always known, that protecting your child isn't about being perfect or strong or having all the answers. It's about showing up, fighting through the fear, and never letting go, even when the world tries to convince you otherwise. The scars faded, but never fully disappeared. They became part of our story, not the defining chapter, but an important one. They reminded us that survival was possible, that truth could prevail, that love could overcome even the deepest betrayal. Ian built a life of purpose from the ashes of trauma. He helped hundreds of children escape similar situations. He raised his own kids with wisdom earned through pain. He proved every day that his mother had been wrong. He'd become an extraordinary man, not despite his experiences, but because he'd learned to transform them. And me? I learned that fatherhood sometimes means fighting battles you never imagined, that justice comes in many forms, that healing isn't linear, but it's always possible, that the breathing exercises you teach your child to manage overstimulation might one day become the foundation for both of your survival. Most importantly, I learned that love, real, protective, unconditional love, is the most powerful force in the universe. It's what made me race through the night to find my son. It's what helped him heal. It's what built our family back stronger than before. The radical feminists had tried to teach Ian that masculinity was toxic, that fathers were dangerous, dangerous, that boys needed to be fixed. Instead, he learned that extremism in any form was the real danger, that good men and women stood together, that strength meant protecting those you loved while respecting those you didn't. Our story became one of survival and redemption. Not the kind that makes headlines or wins awards, but the quiet kind that happens in therapy sessions and bedtime stories and Sunday dinners. The kind where a little boy who was told he was broken grows up to help other broken children heal. We still do it together sometimes, my son and I. Not because we need to anymore, but because it connects us to where we've been and how far we've come. It reminds us that we survived, that we won, that love conquered all.